Okay. I think that's like the FBI saying, what do you think? You think we haven't been recording you the whole time? Of course it's in progress. Of course you should know that it's in progress. All right. So let's recap for a second where we are. We're on 13b4. And the Talmud is digging into Haman's pitch to Achashverosh about why it's a good idea for Achashverosh to let Haman kill all the Jews. And what we have here is a kind of textbook, what's the word? Well, catalog of anti-Semitic accusations that have been, thrown out there over the years, different kinds of complaints about those Jews. And they're all placed into Haman's words and Haman's mouth to give a full-fledged persuasive speech to get Achashverosh to say yes. Maybe what we'll do is, since we had a little break, maybe we'll start again from about 5 lines, whatever it is, from the top of 13b4, the left-hand side. Okay, and we'll start it all over, again. So the Gemara, Haman says to Achashverosh, there is a certain people, Yeshno Am Echad. I'm not making names or anything, but, okay. So you know who I'm talking about. So Rava expounded this verse. Okay, who's going to read for us? Going once, going twice.
I'd stand in the fallback position.
Thank you. All right, it's all yours.
The Megillah continues that Haman said to Achashverosh, there is a certain nation. Rava expounded this verse. Rava said, there was no one, who knew how to slander as skillfully as Haman. For Haman said to Achashverosh, come, let us destroy the Jews. Achashverosh replied to him, I am afraid of their God, that he should not do to me as he did to my predecessors. Haman said to Achashverosh, they have been negligent in their observance of the mitzvot, and their God will therefore not punish you for harming them. Achashverosh answered him, there are rabbis among them who do keep the mitzvot. Haman said to Achashverosh, they are one nation. Haman continued, perhaps you will...
So 1 second. So we did this last time, but nevertheless, it's worth revisiting. What do we make of this first set of statements? Because we have we have this imagined back and forth between Haman and Achashverosh is reluctant. He goes, I'm a little bit nervous about doing this. And what's his nervousness? This nervousness is the Jewish God. They have a God, and that God will protect them, right? So that's a kind of an old, ancient way of thinking, not necessarily the way people think today. Although we could have fun trying to imagine what other kinds of ways that people could be afraid of touching the Jews. Power doesn't have to be divine power. We can imagine that the Jews have some kind of real power, and we don't want to mess with them. So Haman says, don't worry about it. Right? Haman says, don't worry about it. He says, and this is where the Gemara makes this pun, the word yeshno, there exists a certain people, a nation. So the Gemara says, yashnu, they sleep, they fell asleep. They're not as close to their God as they used to be. They were supposed to be, covenantally bound with their God, but they've fell asleep. They fell asleep at the wheel. They don't really care that much. So don't worry, God is not going to come running to save them because they've abandoned God. So on the one hand, is this really a Haman? Would we expect Haman to be saying something like that? We
Well,
expect,
he's like just speaking a language he knows Akaveros will respect, right? I mean, maybe he believes in this, or maybe he doesn't. But in either case, if he wants to make his case, he has to give arguments that Akaveros will go along with.
Achashverosh.
Akashveros, I'm sorry.
Right. So,
Aki.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, obviously the Gemara is putting it in his mouth, but I would say that kind of critique, nobody know how to slander the Jews like Haman. This is this, I mean, this is more of a critique that's an internal critique. This is more of a critique that, the rabbi gets up on Shabbos and goes, shame on all of you. Why aren't you keeping the Torah? Why are you, wake up? Let's be more dedicated to God, right? This is a prophetic kind of chastisement, Isaiah, and so on. So this is, what does Haman care whether we keep the Torah or not, right? So unless, of course, if we do this kind of calculus, well, if the Jews keep the Torah, then God is definitely going to be on their side. So, yeah, maybe. But so on the one hand, it's kind of like putting in Haman's mouth really a self-critique. It has much more punch when we imagine it as being our own self-assessment. How did we get into this problem? We say, on Yontif, in Musaf, we say, "Mipnei chata'enu galinu me'artzeinu." It's because of our sins that we were exiled from our country. We blame ourselves for not being, close enough to God, and therefore we suffered. So it has definitely that connection to internal self-criticism. But I think that there's also a kind of anti-Semitism is truly, a deep, profound kind of sickness of the mind and the heart. And it takes, infinite forms. And one of the forms is actually that, you can, who are, to be a little anachronistic, to bring it more into today's world, but I don't know that that's necessarily so terrible, or so or so anachronistic. Why aren't the Jews as pious in their religion as we are in ours? What's wrong with them? That's a complaint that could come from the outside. And for instance, we know in America that the Jewish community is the most secularized community of all communities that are identified as quote unquote religious, Jewish, Catholic, Protestant in general, or even when you break it down, we're the least church-going, quote unquote. If you want to use the word church as a generic term for the house of worship.
But nobody likes the Haredi either, so
Well, come on, what's the lie? but that was.
We don't. It doesn't matter if we're religious. It's not gonna make a difference.
So that's the sickness of anti-Semitism. But part of the arguments that some anti-Semitic critiques take is this critique that there's something wrong with those Jews because they say they have a religion, but they don't really even practice their own religion. They don't even believe in God. So there's something scary about that free-mindedness, and it all goes together with the cosmopolitan. They're rootless. They don't really have a sense of loyalty to a particular place. They don't really have a sense of connection. And it goes even to the fact that they don't have a connection to God. Why don't they have a connection to God, by the way? Because they're the devil's spawn. Because how could they be connected to God when they're actually against God? So there's this critique about them not being pious on their own terms has a kind of a very paradoxical and bitter kind of force within the lexicon of anti-Semitism. Yeah, Jen.
So, I mean, I think this kind of thing really historically comes up because there's another religion that uses Jewish scripture in their own scripture and can therefore take all the self-critique we have in Jewish scripture and make it not self-critique, like, use it to batter Jews. And that's like a really unique situation in religious history, world religious history. So, there is a whole other religion that can batter us with our own self-critiques because our scripture is also theirs.
It's right there,
And
right there.
yeah, and I feel like that's where the rabbis are probably coming from who wrote this. Although, I mean, if you want to make a really opportunistic Haman, who, you can have him know enough about Judaism to critique them from the inside and make Achashverosh or whatever his name is believe it. So, there's that. But I mean, I think the rabbis are writing in a time where this is probably happening, where they're getting this critique from somebody else who uses from the Christians who use the same scripture.
So definitely, the whole Christian context is very important. I'm going to just say something that we have at this point, no hope of dealing with in any kind of responsible way. And that is that there's a growing awareness in Talmudic studies that, yes, in the West, in the land of Israel, Ma'arava, as the Talmud calls the land of Israel, in the West, you're talking about the Roman Empire that becomes Christianized during the time of the growth of the Talmud. But Rava, this particular sage, he's in Babylonia. The reach of Christianity in Babylonia is not strong. And
okay, then I take that back.
But it's hard to measure. It's hard to measure where this is, and is this, so I don't want to, like I said, I am not equipped, but there's a whole body of scholarship going on now, with let's look into Sasanian culture and see how that's happening with, Zoroastrian religious questions. The whole Babylonian context it has reawakened, and then other people go back, and I mean it's a whole academic spin of discourse. So we just need to be a little bit, if we're talking historically, we need to be a little bit aware of being careful back and forth with that, or at least be a little agnostic about it. There goes those Jews again, being agnostic. It's disgusting. Can't they just take a stand? So yeah. So, and that's as much as I'm ever going to say about that, because that's it. So, and then Achashverosh says, yeah, but there's still these pious rabbis who will stand in the breach and be they represent the best and the brightest, and God will certainly listen to them and protect the Jewish people. I think this is pretty much where we ended, where the answer then is they're all one. The rabbis are part of the big nation. You can't separate the rabbis out from the overall Klal Yisrael. So it's very interesting for Haman to be, a person who believes in the unity of the Jewish people. That's a very beautiful concept that we have. We're all one. We're all connected. But Haman, means it in a derogatory way. So how is it a derogatory statement? How is it a criticism? How is it a slander, to use the word that we had before, to lump the rabbis in with the greater Jewish community? What is he saying as a result?
Those Jews, they're all alike.
So they're not really pious either, right? Because that's the thread we're in here, right? Haman says, "Don't worry, Achashverosh, about the Jewish God. The Jewish God has abandoned them because they've abandoned God." So then Achashverosh says, "What do you mean they abandoned God? What about all those rabbis? Have they abandoned God?" So Haman's retort, they're all part of one people. So you could read it that way. They're not really, they're, just for show. Those Pharisees, they, they just show piety, but they're not really pious. You could read it that way. But I don't think that's the only way to read it. Any other suggestions? Yeah, Bill.
Well, I'm just getting this from the from one of the notes. It says even if they really are pious, they're all in the same soup. They're subjected to the same punishment that the rest of the Jews will get because they are all one nation. And the piety of this small, presumably small group of rabbis is not going to overcome the sins of the whole. They're going to be swept up in the same way.
Right, a kind of a reverse Abraham argument.
Yeah.
Right, that since the majority are not really loyal to God, so the few righteous people are just going to get overruled and swept away by the majority.
Yeah.
And therefore God won't care. Okay, pursuing that a little bit further, we could also say that that's part of, and this is where I think that we left it last time, where I was talking about the difficult position of the rabbi. I don't know anything about Sasanian culture, but I know a little bit about the difficult position of being a rabbi. And that's part of what this is, again, we're putting into Haman's mouth the internal critique, right, of where are the rabbis in this? If we want to start laying it on the Jewish people, they're not pious enough, they're not involved enough. So then what does that say about the rabbis? So then how much responsibility do the rabbis carry for that state of affairs? So this is a very painful question. Personally, professionally, in my profession, this is something that goes, and outside of the profession. And how many times does a community blame the rabbi for not being, a more robust community, and so on. So the rabbis are not simply washed away by the majority, but the question is, where are they vis-a-vis the majority? Yeah, Josie.
When we lived in Maryland, there was a very strong rabbi at the synagogue we joined. And at one point, someone said to him something about, you should be even more pious and observant than you are. And his answer was, it's not my job to be Jewish for you. And I've always remembered that yes, he was the rabbi and he was learned and religious, but it wasn't his job to be the good Jew for the rest of us to go around and eat ham sandwiches.
Right.
Good statement. I like that.
Okay. So Achashverosh is being slowly convinced by Haman, and now Haman goes on to the next possible objection.
The next
Haman
possible
continued.
Haman continued, perhaps you will say that by killing the Jews, I will make a bald spot in your kingdom. That is, one section of your kingdom will be depopulated. That is not the case, for they are scattered abroad among the nations. Perhaps you will say there is some benefit that can be gotten from them, so it is unprofitable to destroy them. This is not the case for Mephorad. They are like the mule, which does not bear fruit. That is, they do not produce anything worthwhile. And
Okay, so one second.
Yep.
So again, how does this echo classic anti-Semitic tropes? Right. This is, again, it's we, with 2020 hindsight, 1,500 or more years after this text is written, and we've seen it, again and again and again, and yet it's so prescient and it's so accurate in terms of these factors. So the idea that that we're all over the place. This goes back even, remember, to Pharaoh, right? When the Jews are in Egypt, and it's like I think like Janice has mentioned, like everybody mentioned, we get it coming and going. If we stick together, we're too clannish. If we're all over the place, then we're not loyal and we're not really connected to each other. What kind of group are we? So the same thing is going on over here. And nobody will notice if you pull out the one Jew that's in this town and the two Jews that are in that town. Basically, after they all disappear, you'll still have a thriving empire, and there won't be any visible damage, right? And then the second part is they are a sterile people, right? They are incapable of creating anything. This is, of course, one of the most insidious and one of the most powerful accusations that have been thrown out against the Jews again and again and again. Certainly it was part of the Western and then the German, anti-Semites brought it to to perfection. The accusation that we are the kind of, if we're not capable of producing anything, then how do we continue to live? The answer is we're leeches, we're parasites, right? The only way we can live is by drawing out the life from others. Culturally, this was Wagner's famous claim. There are no creative Jewish musicians and composers. They're just sucking out the music from everybody else. They just steal it from us. So this idea that we don't have anything to contribute is a very, very central part of element of the anti-Semitic discourse. And again, as I mentioned before, all of these pieces contribute to dehumanizing the Jew, because these critiques are meant to show that we're not like regular people. We're not like regular human beings. Regular human beings produce and reproduce and make culture and make businesses and so on. Regular human beings come into groups. They have their own homes, their own homelands, and so on and so forth. There's, these creatures, you would expect them to have horns, because they certainly can't be regular human beings. They certainly can't. They don't live the human life. Okay. So, and of course, there's a kind of an interesting transition. Is Achashverosh bringing up these objections? No, this is the way that the discourse is rolling to a crescendo. First, it's Haman says, Achashverosh says, wait a second. Haman says, Achashverosh says, but now Haman is on a roll. And Haman is like now just taking over. And I can anticipate all of your objections. And believe me, none of these objections. And Achashverosh has been rendered passive. And he's just watching how the argument of Haman is just you can't oppose it. Yeah, David.
So it's like a tennis match. They're knocking the ball back and forth. They're having this discussion. But if Haman,
I would say not like a tennis match. I would say more like a boxing match, because what happens is in the beginning, each one is throwing punches at the other. But then finally, Haman takes over the match. In tennis, you can't get, if the other guy doesn't hit back the ball, there's no match. But here in a boxing match, Haman is now totally in control. He's pummeling, the imagined opponent. Anybody that would be against, not killing the Jews. Here's this argument. Here's this argument. Here's this argument. Here's this argument, like that.
and if he could only see the future, which obviously he can't. But if he could have only seen the future, he might well have seen the torture and killing of the rabbis at the hands of the Romans, which would have been an
That
argument.
was actually that was before him.
It was. Oh, so he was. I'm confused. Haman might well have known about.
Yes, Haman is in. Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. I'm confused.
Right.
I'm
rabbis
confusing my
knew.
BCEs with my CEs. You're right.
Yeah.
Correct.
The rabbis might well have known by then, but Haman would
Absolutely.
not.
Yes. No,
But-
yeah,
but-
that's right. The rabbis are putting this in his mouth because they have seen hundreds of years of this kind of stuff.
But Haman's argument would have been that it doesn't matter that God would recognize the efforts of the rabbis on behalf of the people as the whole, because certainly the Romans killed the rabbis. So he would what the Romans did turns the whole argument of the rabbis. I'm having trouble with words. There's a word in Yiddish. The credit of our fathers. I forget.
It's
the word.
chusavos.
I'm sorry.
It's a Hebrew term. It's chusavos.
That the chus of
Zechus.
Okay, the chus of the rabbis, according to Achashverosh, would have saved the Jews conceivably. So he's worried about crossing the Jews. But if Haman had seen the future, he would see that the chus of the rabbis didn't do them any good. By the time the Romans came around, it would have been a defeating argument. Maybe a coup de grace on the part of Haman that could well have ended the whole argument. But the rabbi certainly didn't want to bring that up, I guess, because it was very painful.
Well, rabbis brought it up, and that's one of the ways to read that they're one nation. You're thinking, Achashverosh, that the merit of the rabbis is going to save the Jewish people. On the contrary, the rabbis will bear the brunt of the punishment for the Jewish people. And that's what the Roman martyrology story is understood, how it's understood by the rabbis, that the 10 rabbis who are killed are sacrificed to atone for the sins of all of the Jewish people. They are connected to the Jewish people, so the most righteous are the ones who suffer the most. Yeah. I wanted to, okay, so yeah. All right. Oh, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to bring up that this idea that we're compared here to a donkey, to a mule. A mule and a donkey are not the same thing. The donkey does reproduce, right?
Yes.
And the mule is the horse and the donkey put together.
Yep.
So there was one really classic. There are many, but there is a classic anti-Semitic voice in the ancient world that who was I think he was Egyptian. Philo, I think, is acquainted with him. I think his name is Manetho. And if I'm not mistaken, he said, fake facts have a stronger life than real facts. He said, you know what the Jews have in their inner sanctum, in their holy of holies? You know what they really worship? They worship a donkey or a mule. I don't remember exactly which one he said. So that's this idea also that could be alluded to. It could be a faint echo that the rabbis are saying. Miforad, no, they're actually connected to this pered, this mule. Okay. So, and perhaps you will say that a small province.
Yep. And perhaps you will say that a small province is made up of them, so you do not wish to destroy one of your provinces by destroying them. The verse teaches that Haman replied to this, that the Jews are in all the provinces of your kingdom.
Right. So don't worry about it. And again, coming back to this idea, they're spread out all over the place.
They're everywhere.
So overall, you get rid of them, the general complexion of your community, of your empire will not change. Go ahead.
Haman continued, as stated in the verse, their laws are different from all the other nations, for they do not eat from our food, and they do not marry our women, and they do not marry their women to us. Haman continued, as stated in the verse, and they do not observe the king's laws, for they waste the whole year avoiding the king's work with the excuse, today is the Sabbath, or today is Passover.
Right. So these accusations are also very familiar to us. And this is, again, actually targeting Jewish distinctiveness and saying, we resent them if they're like us, we resent them if they're not like us.
Yeah.
Who do they think they are? They think that they're better than us. They think that they're too good for us. They think that they're too good, that their children, for us to marry them and for them to marry us. And they don't eat like we do. So, these are again, historically long-lived accusations. And what about that last part? Does that ring bells for anybody? Can't hear anybody saying. So this is a complaint that, every other day is a Jewish holiday. Can you imagine? Like, when do they ever work? When do they ever do anything?
That's
oh,
only
no,
because they didn't know Hindus yet, who have way more holidays than we do.
Do the Hindu holidays prevent them from working?
I actually don't know, but we at least some of them you take off for school for. But I do remember when I worked at Verizon and there was a strike. I was corporate, but we didn't work weekends. So I don't know exactly understand how this came about. But when the managers had to cover for us all, because we were, had our signs on the pavement, there were a lot of Orthodox who worked there, and the ones who were managers, a lot of them were on strike with us, but the ones who were managers didn't have to work on Saturday, and the real church-going Christians were really upset that they didn't get off their Sundays, which I thought the simple solution here was just give them off for their Sunday mornings, because there were Christians who go to church 2 or 3 hours, it's their big church service. I don't know why they didn't do that, but I also don't know why anybody was working on Saturday, since the strikers didn't work on Saturday. So it's a very strange situation, but I didn't really hear anybody say anything anti-Semitic. The demand seemed to be that we also deserve our time off, but I can see where a situation like that could, get ugly. I don't think it did, but I get where, I'm not saying it's right. I get where stuff is coming from, but there was an easy solution. Again, I don't know why they were working weekends in the first place.
David.
A personal story. Maybe in contravention of what we're reading here. When I was a newly minted MBA, I worked for a company called Turner Construction Company, a huge contractor in the US, and I was in the Boston office for them. And one of the things that had to be done was that the hoists that raise up the materials and raise up the people, raise and lower, they needed maintenance. And when did they want to do it? They wanted to do it on Christmas because they couldn't stop the job. So better to have a handful of workers work on Christmas so the job could continue. And management looked around the room, and I was on the construction management team. They looked around the room and, well, somebody's got to work. If there are workers here, somebody's got to work. And I raised my hand and I said, look, I purposely waved this in their face. I'm Jewish. This isn't my Chag Christmas. I can come in and I'll do the job. I volunteered for it so that the Christians could have their Christmas. And the reaction was, at first their mouths were agape, and they looked me right in the eye and they say, okay, that's settled, but I think they appreciated it a great deal.
Good for you. I mean, this is actually a practice that, we are, that I think many of us have heard about. Doctors do this.
Yeah.
And other people that are where people have to take shifts and so on and so forth. And, and they make sure that their co-religionists come in there and say, okay, we're not doing Christmas. So let our friends, do their Christmas, and this is good for us.
Yeah.
So yes, that's a beautiful kind of situation where there's some symbiosis going on, where there's real cooperation. Yeah, Geraldine.
Well, that's what we do with IHN too. We open our shul at that time. And when my nephews who were scouts, their scouting troop was from the shul. And on Christmas, they worked in the food bank to make dinners for people as well.
Right.
But on the other hand, when I was teaching, we were only allowed 5 personal days, and they were for very specific reasons. And when I first started, there were only 3 personal days, and you couldn't take a sick day instead of a personal day. So for Yontif, when a Jewish holiday was one of them, and when the Yontifs were not on weekends, I certainly exceeded those days, and we were paid for 200 days of the year. Okay, we don't get paid for holidays or vacations, which a lot of people don't know. Anyway, so when it was in excess of the number of days that I was allotted, even though I had 300 sick days, I was not allowed to use those. From my salary was deducted for each day 1/200th of my salary.
Wow.
of my gross salary, not the salary that I took home. And so, in fact, I paid to have those days off.
Right. So in my book, you're a mitzvah hero, and you're an example of what a loyal Jew is all about. But the pressure that you lived under is not a pressure that most people today are willing to endure. And financially, they're not willing to make that sacrifice. And we have it, for the kids. I'm not going to take my kid out of school, and people that work that are not willing to sacrifice in that way. It's a very, 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 very difficult situation to live in the 2 worlds that we live in, for sure.
But I also, in addition to not being there and to not being paid for those days, I still had to leave lesson plans
Absolutely.
for the substitute to do. So I still had to put everything in order.
Right. So yeah, I mean, this is what happens when you are a small minority within a big system that takes for granted that it's just going to roll along with its rules. And, there's basically only one place in the entire world where this pressure is almost non-existent, and that's the state of Israel. So that's where the shoe is on the other foot, where the schedule is that these are the national days of rest, and these are the national days of the holidays and so on that are recognized. Otherwise, like Haman says, we're just this little tiny speck in a big gigantic mosaic of communities, and everybody else has their own life to live. The idea that the Jews keep Shabbos, though, is actually an anti-Semitic, thorn in the side, pre-Christianity. This is something that was seen as just incomprehensible when, because we take for granted with the victory of Christianity and Islam that there is such a thing as a day of rest. But the Jewish invention of the day of rest was exactly that. There was no such thing as a day of rest. Here and there might be some kind of festival for the gods or something like that, but it wasn't this kind of regular programmed weekly thing for sure. The idea of a week and a weekend, and a Sabbath was horrifying to the average Roman. This was clearly irrational, clearly something that the Jews had invented in order not to work, because they're lazy. They didn't get it. Now, the question is only which day, which holiday do you take off, and so on. But that was all inherited from the Jewish people. The Shabbat is one of the gifts of the Jews, certainly to Western civilization. Yeah, Geraldine.
When I was not in school yet, they were doing some kind of renovation in the schools in Nutley. And they had a meeting because they were going to close the school, and to make up the time, they were going to have school on Saturday to make up those days, the 180 days required by the state. And my mother went with our rabbi at that time, and some other people went too, I guess. And they went to the meeting to explain why that was not acceptable, and to please come up with another method. And at that time, we had a fairly decent Jewish population in Nutley. There were 150 children in the Hebrew school at that time, for example.
Oh.
Anyway, I remember saying to my mother when she went to the meeting, "Why are you going? We're not in school. It won't affect us." And she said, "I'm going because I'm a Jew, and that's what they need to know. It's a problem." And as it turned out, they did not make up the days on Shabbos to do the renovation, but they did it during the summertime.
Good.
But even when it doesn't affect you personally,
Right.
you don't observe it personally, you're still part of the klal.
Right. That's the positive of saying we're one nation. We're one group together.
Yeah.
Josie, yeah.
I've always felt recently that the schools have got to make accommodations now for Muslim students, especially the long fasting periods of Ramadan and their holidays. And I don't think they've quite gotten to that point yet, but they should. And as the Jewish community, we should support them because we want the same consideration for our holidays. I know there are times when the rabbis get together before the school year to make sure that there's not classes on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
No.
Whoa, wait a minute. Wait, that's
That's
okay.
not true.
Or that there's
Exactly.
excused absence, or that.
No, not
Wait a minute.
Never, ever had Rosh off for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But I will say one thing. When I was teaching, and it was considered an excused absence for every religion. So they were not allowed in our town to give any tests on those days or require any homework assignments to be given at that time. But it was for any religion across the board.
Jen.
Yeah, I mean, actually, we don't go that far, okay? Because we have a million holidays that people celebrate. We have Arabs, we have like Muslims, we have Hindus, we have Wiccans, we have Jehovah's Witnesses, whatever. We cannot sit there and say there's not going to be a test on this day for whatever your holiday is. But every holiday is an automatic excused absence. There's no question. The holidays that get chosen in almost any district, they look at how many teachers are how many teachers are Hindu, how many teachers are Jewish, how many teachers are Muslim, how many teachers are Christian. That's how they decide the holidays. I mean, you know, Christmas is pretty much going to be a given, but after that, if you have, like, in my district, there's 2 of us who are Jews. Like, we're besties because we're the only 2 Jews. They're not going to give off the district. Like, it would make no sense. And I wouldn't expect it of them. And I am personally not as heroic as you, Geraldine. I could get days off by just skipping the pay, but I'm not quite there yet in order to do that. But so I have my 3 personal days, and I have vacation days, unlike teachers. So actually I'm better off than the teachers are. And
Yeah, I think
It wasn't heroic. It was more difficult to leave. This year, for example, if I had been teaching, I would have missed the first 2 days of school.
I was in that
happened-
position, and
that
I had to make a
happened about
choice.
12 years ago when I was
Mhm.
still teaching. It's an impossible task to
Look,
leave things to the group you have.
I understand that.
Not-
I hit both
please
of those
don't.
times.
Please don't say it's heroic. It was not heroic.
Fine. I will say I made the decision to work the first day of Rosh Hashanah. And I'm like, I look, because in the office, there's only 2 of us. Everything collapses. It was the first time back after COVID. And I just decided I'm working first day. And then I took off second day. And my boss had said, you can take off first day. We will survive. Everything will survive. And that's true. But, you know, then there's a guilt factor and whatever. So we all make our own decisions and do what we feel like we have to do. But it wouldn't be right also. I mean, as a minority religion, and I feel all minority religions, I don't think we are disrespectful of Muslim holidays at all. We're not disrespectful of Ramadan. In fact, we know usually which kids are fasting, and if they don't want to go with the other kids in the cafeteria, we always have them come up, hang out in the office or hang out in the library or anywhere they want to be where they're not around food. I feel like we're very good with the Jehovah Witnesses who don't celebrate Halloween. Like, we always make a separate space for them where so they don't feel like they have to take off of school that day. They can come and just, you know, do stuff that's fun without being Halloween oriented. So, I mean, I feel like we really do try our best to make all sorts of accommodation. And in my school, we're doing it in like 4 languages. So, you know, I feel like we do pretty well. And I feel like the public school systems are good about this stuff. And in New York, where they have so many Muslims, yeah, you start getting off the really important holidays, and which is how it should be. That's fine. It
I'm
should go
not
by those.
objecting to that. I agree.
No, I'm talking to Josie, who said we should be doing more for Muslim holidays and things. Like, I guess you can always do more, but I feel
Just
like
so that
we are doing it.
everyone knows this, we had many Jehovah Witnesses in our school, and it wasn't only for Halloween. It was for any
for
time a
birthdays or for
child had a
anything.
birthday, they
Mhm.
had to be taken out of the classroom.
what
Yeah.
birthday? What about a birthday?
Jehovah Witnesses don't do birthdays, so they don't take part in that. But we always make space for kids who are in that situation. We always try to make them comfortable.
You have to
You know,
accommodate.
so exactly.
What
have to
school district
accommodate.
are you in, Jennifer?
I'm in Kearney.
Carney.
Yeah, so I
And
think,
right by Nutley. I mean, we're all good at this. I feel like we do a good job with many, many different cultures, many, many different holidays, etc.
I think it's good to hear all the good news. I think that overall, we're in a much better place than we were a generation ago.
Yes.
So I think that things have opened up, and our awareness has definitely opened up, and creative solutions are being attempted. So that's a lot of good news. We are not living in Haman's world, thankfully, very thankfully. I
Oh,
want-
more good news. I've actually had people want to fight for me in the union to have Jewish holidays off. I said, like, it's not necessary. I mean, I have days I can use, and I don't expect the world to revolve around the 2 of us in the whole district who are Jewish. I mean, it would be kind of silly. So, but people do feel like they want to make everything for everybody as equal as they can.
I want to make one small point, which is a delicate point, and I hope it's not misunderstood. I don't know the ins and outs of the other religious traditions in any accurate way, but to take one general kind of example, right? The Christian Sabbath. So what Jen was mentioning before. There are very few Christians who continue to take the idea of not doing labor, whatever that means, on their Sabbath seriously. That was something that was basically thrown out when the Christian Sabbath was adopted instead of the Jewish Sabbath. So first of all, of course, they changed the day because they didn't want it to be the Jewish day. They changed it from Saturday to Sunday. And they also changed the nature of the day. And again, I don't know what's going on with others, and I'm not claiming anything about this. But from the Talmud's perspective, from a traditional perspective, there's a difference between somebody coming in like a traditional Jew and saying, I cannot work on this day because I cannot write, I cannot travel, I cannot do all kinds of physical kinds of labors that that they're prohibited to me. That's different than somebody saying, I'd rather go to church on a Sunday morning. It's not quite the same thing. And that has redounded toward, to Jewish, to people resenting the Jews because they have this like more stringent idea of what they can't do. So who the heck do you think you are? That, just get with it. The rest of us have been able to make a very, very nice, meaningful religious life without all of these terrible restrictions. So what you're making up is just basically an excuse that because you don't want to be part of the the system that we're part of. So that's, there's this extra, edge, which a traditionally observant Jew has to struggle with. I want to tell a nice story, and I've told this story before, and it's the way I tell the story. So it's about Zelda's father. So he was in Hungary, and of course, Hungary was basically the last country that was taken over by the Nazis. And he was a weaver, and an industrial. He used big industrial looms to weave big textiles. And he was trying to get out of Hungary, and the only way you could get out was if you were offered a job someplace else. So he wrote many letters all over the world to any textile company that he could find the information about, asking for a job and saying, I'm a high quality industrial weaver, and can you use my services? And only one company in the entire world sent him back a response. It was in New Zealand. And they said, we can offer you a job, but only if you know this particular loom that we use, which he didn't know. So he wrote them back, of course I know that loom. And, send me the papers, and, and then every night he would go to the industrial arts library and he would look up the manual for that particular loom, and he would try to teach himself how to use that loom. So he got his visa, and he got out in time, and he spent the last couple of years of the war in New Zealand. And he lands in New Zealand, and he had to leave his mother behind, and it's a whole story. Anyway, he gets to New Zealand, and he has to report to work, and he comes into work the first day, and he has to meet the boss, the owner of the company. Goes into his office, and my father-in-law says, thank you for giving me this job. I have to tell you, I don't work on Saturdays. And he said this, and who knows what would have happened. And the man was sitting behind the desk. He gets up and he comes around from the other side of the desk, and he comes over to him and he gives him a big hug. And he says, welcome, you're a traditional observant, Old Testament Jew. He was a frum Christian. I don't know what kind, but he so appreciated and respected my father-in-law for being loyal to his religion, to his God, and to his tradition. And he said, absolutely, of course, obviously, it saved his life. So this is not a message, therefore everybody should keep Shabbos, but it's just, thank God that worked. But, his own conviction was, this is it, I'm not doing this. It doesn't matter what the other considerations are. This is holy and I'm not going to give it up. So I tell that story in his memory. All right. Let's go. Haman, continue.
Haman continued, as stated in the verse. And it is of no benefit to the king to tolerate them, for they eat, drink, and mock the throne. For even if a fly falls in a glass of wine of one of them, he casts away the fly and drinks the wine. But if my master, the king, touches a glass of wine of one of them, that person throws it to the ground and does not drink it.
Okay, so what's that all about? Look at the note 54.
Note 54, wine poured in idolatrous service becomes yain nesek,
Yes.
nesek wine, and a Jew is prohibited from drinking it or having any benefit from it.
Right. Nesech means a libation, right? Pouring out for ritual purposes.
The rabbis decreed that wine touched or poured by an idolater, even not in the service to his God, be prohibited for a Jew to drink.
Okay.
See the Shulchan Aruch.
Now, this is an anachronistic, situation. Back to what David was, and then I got confused and back and forth. This is post Haman, but nevertheless, it's put into Haman's mouth, and something that again, the rabbis were aware of as a kind of a sore point or a potential sore point, and they said, look, a piece of schmutz gets into your drink, or a fly falls into it. You take if you're not that fastidious, you just get a spoon, you get the fly out of there, and you continue to drink your drink. But if a guy touches your glass, you have to throw out. So obviously a guy has more cooties than a fly, and look at this is how they really think of us, right? So, and this is like the mirror image. This is the mirror thing. The dehumanization of the Jew is justified by the conviction that the Jews dehumanize us. They don't consider us goyim real people. They don't consider us to have human dignity. So what do you expect? All right. I want to say also, this is a real problem. This is not just an anti-Semitic lie. Within the Jewish community, racism, not just black-white racism, but racism of thinking that the Jews are a separate race and that the Goyim are a separate category of human beings, and that they're a lower category of human beings. This is a real issue that exists in the Jewish community, and that different people either pay attention to or don't pay attention to or refuse to pay attention to, because they don't either because they're really racist, or because they don't want to believe that Jews could be racist. Unfortunately, it's definitely a reality within the Jewish community. So and this is the struggle that any serious Jew has to engage in. How do I create a Judaism that calls for commitment, sacrifice, and a sense of how holy and precious it is, without denigrating anybody else, anything else? How do you do that? Is it possible to do that? All right, go ahead.
Haman continued, as stated in the next verse, if it pleases the king, let it be written to destroy them, and 10,000 talents of silver, etc., I will weigh in the hands of those who take charge of business to bring it into the king's treasuries.
Okay, that's the continuation of the verse. So what we have now is, first of all, he's made all these all these arguments that there's no objection to this idea, right? And now what he says is, and I'll pay you for it, right? He says, let me contract this as let me be your contractor. And clearly, where's this money going to come from? He's going to pay the king 20,000 talents, right? Is that what it says? 10,000 talents.
That's a
10,000.
huge amount of money.
Okay, if you say so. So I'm going to pay the king a lot of money for this privilege. Where's the money coming from? It comes from the Jews, right? This is like tax farming, right? Let me get the taxes. So then, if I get $100 million of taxes, I'll give you $10 million, right? And I get to keep the $90 million, right? So this is what Haman is saying. If I'm able to kill all the Jews the way the Nazis exterminated all the Jews and took all of their possessions, and he says, so good, so I can afford to give you, King Achashverosh, for this privilege, I'll give you a nice, really huge amount of money. But from the perspective of what Haman is thinking he's going to make, he can definitely, make this offer, with a sense of satisfaction. Okay, Jen.
In this, that's revolting. I don't want to not look at the seriousness of that, but the context of all this is Haman was just angry at Mordecai for not bowing. Is that correct?
That's
I'm
the way
actually
it starts.
curious.
That's the way it
Yeah.
starts. That's the way the story, that's the trigger.
What I'm kind of wondering is I don't know the answer to this. I mean, when you have cultures like ours up until the 19th century or Asian cultures today that bowing is just a common thing between two people, is it actually forbidden for us to bow? Is there any actual rule like that? Or is it you can't bow to somebody in the context of treating them like a god?
Exactly.
Okay,
Right.
so polite bowing is totally
Palau
okay.
bowing and palau in the sense of honoring somebody even is
Okay.
absolutely fine. What's not fine is worship.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
Okay, what, Josie, then Geraldine. Yeah.
I always wondered, what do the Jews in England do if they're presented to the Queen? Do they bow? Do they kneel? What do
Yeah.
they do?
Yeah. There was
But
only one. There was one person. He was gonna, get the, what do you call it? The
Knighthood?
Yeah, and he didn't want to bow, and the Queen said, "Why is this night different than all other nights?"
That proves my point that all rabbis really want to be stand-up comedians.
Comedians.
Right. Geraldine, yes.
Isn't there a law that says one of the things that we're required to do is to go according to the law of the land?
Yes.
So how does that fit into all this?
Dina Malchuta Dina, no?
Right. Dina de Malchuta Dina.
Dina.
The law of the land is the law. So that is a statement that's found in the Talmud. How it's applied, requires a whole Talmud to discuss. But the general consensus, not just what's taken for granted is that the law of the land is the law, except when it contradicts Torah law. So, for instance, if the law of the land is to work on Shabbos, then that law is not legitimate, right? The law of the land is only in the interstices, in the in-between things of reality. So, for instance, all commercial reality, right? How do you so the Talmud has all kinds of things about how do you acquire something, and things like that. So, and tort law, what if I damage something, if I steal something, if I hurt you, physically, there's a whole bunch of Talmudic law. All of that is preempted by state law, right? If we live, under the protection of the state, then dina de malchuta dina. Then the law of that state is the law, and that's part of the social contract that inheres in our being able to be subject, or citizens even. Until recently we never were citizens, but subject to living in a particular place is that we abide by the laws of the place that we live in. But those laws have to be laws that are the general social cohesion kinds of laws, not specifically about ritual law or any kind of law that has to do with what the Torah mandates or prohibits.
Thank you.
And of course, then you've got, people, there's theory and then there's practice. Only the law of a legitimate state is the law, right? But what's a legitimate state? So if the state is not legitimate, then the laws don't have to be listened to. Look, we have this problem, in civil disobedience all the time, right? So, when do we say that this is an immoral law, or this is a law that I cannot, live by? And ironically and sadly and tragically, in the state of Israel, the whole question of why isn't Israeli law binding on everybody in Israel, including the Haredi, or certain parts of the Haredi world, or certain parts of the religious Zionist world, and they don't find Israeli law binding. Why? Because it's not a legitimate state. So if it's not a legitimate state, I don't have to listen to the laws, right? I mean, it goes every which way. The same way that we, us good people, would find it unconscionable to follow the laws of a dictatorship, a racist, fascist, terrible state. We would say no. That has lost its legitimacy. It cuts both ways. So the fascists think that a liberal state is not a legitimate state. Yeah. Okay, we have a few more minutes. Okay, so Haman has offered Achashverosh a nice, tidy sum. Do you have a sense of how much 10,000 talents of silver is?
I just have to think that a talent was a lot of money. I don't have an exact amount, and I may be wrong. It's just
And a talent was like a brick or something. What was it?
I think they originally weighed out
weight?
silver in
Chunks.
talents. It was a measure. It was a measure of weight. I think.
Okay, go ahead.
The Gemara Remarks. Reish Lakish said, "It was clearly known in advance, before he who spoke and the world came into being, that is God, that Haman was destined to weigh out shekalim, that is silver coins, for the purpose of destroying the Jews. Therefore, he caused the Jews to precede their shekalim to Haman's shekalim. And thus we learned in a Mishnah. On the 1st of Adar, they, the Sanhedrin, proclaim regarding the payment of the shekalim and regarding kilayim." The Megillah continues.
Okay, so that's enough. Okay, so this is a little bit along the lines that we've heard before, that before God brings the troubles and the travails, God creates the remedy ahead of time, right? So, and here's a similar kind of situation where Reish Lakish takes this idea of eshkol, which means I will weigh out, because that's what a shekel is. A shekel is some kind of weight that becomes a monetary, what's the currency? Tender, legal tender. So that's what Haman says. I'll weigh out for you, Achashverosh. I'll weigh out for you 10,000 talents of silver. So, and when was that supposed to happen? When was the destruction of the Jews supposed to happen? In Adar, in the month of Adar. So Reish Lakish says, therefore God knew this ahead of time, right? And therefore God created a mitzvah of shekels for the Jews to perform, to redound to their credit. right? So that this would be something that would make the Jewish people beloved to God, so that Haman's shekel project would not succeed, because we already have been engaging in a shekel project that is for the service of God, right? So that's going to outweigh, literally, right? Literally outweigh Haman's plot. So what is the shekel thing? So we have, of course, the shekel is a biblical term. You have the idea that every household had to pay for the upkeep of the temple, the machatzit hashekel, half a shekel, right? That everybody had to give for the fiscal year of the temple. The fiscal year started with the first day of the first month of the Hebrew year, which is Nisan, right? The month of Passover. Nisan is the first month of the year. Adar is the last month of the year. So on the first of Adar, there would be a campaign, and Shomrei would send out a little MailChimp. Remember that you have to give in your half a shekel this month. We were having our fundraising campaign, register here and so on and so forth. So this happened starting from the first day of Adar, and therefore our contributions to serving God through the shekels that we collected in Adar stood us in good stead for when we had to weather the attacks by Haman, who wanted to destroy us in Adar. So that's Reish Lakish's way of looking at things. Of course, again, somewhat anachronistic, because the system that he's talking about is a rabbinic system that happened in the Second Temple times, and Haman is right before that, right? So did they actually have such a system before that? I mean, they had the half shekel before that. That's because that's in the Torah. But did they actually have the system of setting up the campaign in Adar? Reish Lakish is saying, tradition. If it was a tradition in Second Temple times, it must have been a tradition in First Temple times. Kilayim is the idea of mixed species. You're not allowed to mix species. The famous kind of mixed species is linen and wool. But in growing things, that's in garments. In growing things, you're not allowed to mix in the same field two different kinds of species. It's complicated what constitutes a different species and so on. But the famous thing, for instance, is Kalai HaKerem, which is specifically singled out in the Torah. You can't plant wheat and a vineyard together. So you have to separate the two fields, the vineyard from the wheat field. So if Kilayim does grow, if the fields are put together and they're within proximity of each other, then they actually make each thing, the wheat and the vineyard and the grapes, prohibited. So the idea was that in the beginning of Adar, people would inspect their fields so that, God forbid, if any mixing had happened during the winter time, this is the beginning of spring now again, everybody would clean up their fields and separate their fields one from the other. So that was also announced, but that's just a side thing. That's not Reish Lakish's point. Reish Lakish's point, of course, is about the half shekel collections. Okay, we're going to stop here, and hopefully we'll be able to continue next time. And we're right the last few lines of page 13, and we're going to go into page 14, which everybody should have already. And I'll get the 15 and 16 ready very soon. Okay, everybody, kol tov.
Toda Rabba.